Welcome everybody to the panel, the Drupal Association, what it is, what it isn't, and what it could be. I'm assuming you're all in the right place. If you're not, this is your chance to leave. Bye, Bert. Okay, look, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you those who were here on time to allow a little extra slack time to allow people to come in after our amazing group photo. So with no further ado, what I would like to do is just set you up for how we're going to go through this today. I want to start with some introductions from our amazing panelists. Thank you all for being here and agreeing to participate in this with me. I'm really honoured to have such an amazing, group of people to have this discussion today. Then we're going to just basically go through those sort of three questions, a little bit about what the Drupal Association is and bust some myths, because one of the things I've grown to appreciate is the perception of what the Drupal Association is and the reality of what the Drupal Association is. There's actually this chasm for some people. There's a lot of assumptions about what the DA does that aren't necessarily true. There's also a lot of assumptions about what it should or could be doing, which it doesn't have the resources to do. This is one of the things I've struggled with. How do we communicate that better? So getting really clear on what the DA is in the kind of current state. We're going to have a quick thing of like, what's our favourite myth that we've heard about the DA? That'll be a quick one, just like for some chortles and good fun. But then sort of towards the end, I want to kind of throw it much more open to what it could be, because I think, we're in a really amazing time right now where we're transitioning from Megan's incredible leadership and handing over to Tim to kind of hold the reins for us, so that what it could be has some real kind of potential. And of course, we've got a brand new board member with Suzanne, who is going to be part of that, what it could be. And I sort of do a fond farewell and end a stint of 7 years on the board. And Megan has been there even longer, as with 8 years, has been from the first employee of the Drupal Association to now ending her tenure as our ED. And Piyush is here as our non-officially Drupal Association person, but has definitely been involved with the Drupal Association and is involved in the building of a new Drupal Association in India. And Tim, who has also been with the DA for a while now and with Drupal for even longer, and is picking up the reins as our interim ED. So I feel like we've got a kind of nice mix of, past, present and future. And that's sort of where I'd like to start. So I didn't introduce myself, in case you don't know. I'm Donna Benjamin. I'm a project lead and business analyst with Catalyst IT in Australia, and I've been on the board of the Drupal Association for 7 years. I also did a little bit of time, that's a good way of putting it, as as chair of the community working group, which is a project side group to sort of handle conflict mediation and support the community. So that's me. So I'm going to hand over now to Megan to introduce herself.
So I'm Megan Sanicki. I'm the executive director for a week and a half. My background started in tech, and then I moved to government, where I fell in love with serving communities. And then I said I want to get back into tech and keep serving communities. And so I said I want to get into open source. I found the Drupal Association and basically convinced them to hire me. And it's been history ever since.
I'm Suzanne Dergachova, and I am brand new to the Drupal board. So I officially started on November 1st, but I was at the board retreat this past weekend. So I'm excited to be involved. And my background, I'm involved, I guess, quite a bit in the community and my local community in Montreal. And I run a Drupal agency there and also a Drupal training program.
Hi, good morning. I'm Piyush Poddar from India. You might have guessed that. I work for a company called Accelerant as a director of partnerships looking after the UK and EU region. And I've been trying to get on the board for a couple of months. But then the community decided that you need to do a bit more work before you do that. So then I thought, okay, let's create another association. So we're trying to build an association in India with the support of Shamla under Drupal Association's leadership, and have been very active in the local community over there. Very passionate about Drupal.
Hi, and I'm Tim Lennon, Hestenet on Drupal.org. I first got involved in Drupal 12 and a half years ago, if my D.O account is to be believed. And at the time, I was using freelance Drupal to offset my tuition at university, like many of the people who first started in the early days of the community. And then I kind of stepped away from the community for a little while just because I found work in other places and things like that. And then 4 years ago, I joined the Drupal Association. And for the next week and a half, I'm still the director of engineering. And then I'll be taking over as the interim executive director. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. If you could pass the mic back. I want us to start with what the Drupal Association is. And I think perhaps the best person to give a quick outline of that is Megan, who has been at the Drupal Association for all of its modern incarnation, but it kind of existed before that. So before I get Megan to talk about what it is, I want to talk about a little video that I put on YouTube back in 2012. Dries came to Drupal Down Under then, an event I was running in Melbourne, and he did a lightning talk about what the Drupal Association was. And he talked about how it was actually born in crisis, that Drupal.org had crashed. The server that it was on had literally melted down and smoke came out of it. So he managed to quickly put up a page, a sort of PayPal page, to raise some funds to get a new server. And he said that within 24 hours of that happening, he had a new server donated by Sun Microsystems, rest in peace, Sun, and $10,000. And he said, I'd never had $10,000 before. I was just a student. So he needed to create an entity to be the custodian or put that money somewhere. And that was really the very beginning of the first version of the Drupal Association. I think that was like 2005-ish, something like that. And then sort of roll forward to about 2010, 2011, we had the Drupal, I think one of the big DrupalCons in the US, I think it was Washington or DC, yeah, it was DC, DrupalCon DC, made quite some money, and there was also an association or an organisation created in the US. And it was around about 2011 that the European VZW that Dries had originally set up and the American organisation merged to become the DA as we know it. Does that sound about right? Mm-hmm. Okay, over to Megan.
Yeah. Although I think Barrett would add some details to that story.
He's looking sceptical.
Oh, I woke him up. Never mind. Go back to sleep. It's okay. It's okay. Okay, so what is the DA?
So what is the DA today?
So our mission is to unite the community to help them build and promote the software, to promote Drupal. And that is a nice, big, overarching mission. And there's many, many things that we can do. Like there's lots of programs that we can do. There's a lot of need out there to launch more programs to support a lot of the work that the community needs to build and promote the software. We do have some limitations. We're about a $4 million organization with 17 staff members, 2 of which are donated by companies working out of India. And so as in any project, you know, you have your resources that kind of define how much you can do. And so we focus on DrupalCon and bringing the community together that way. And we also focus on supporting Drupal.org with the developer tools, but also been working on improving the adoption journey so someone can come to the site and understand how why Drupal would be the right choice for them, and to connect them to agencies in their area so they can kind of move along and choose Drupal for their organization. And those are the 2 primary things that we're doing. However, one thing that we've realized as an organization is that when you have a large global community and you have 17 people and $4 million, you want to do more, but you can't just as staff alone. And so we've been really embracing a partnership strategy to help us scale impact. So one example of that is partnering with GitLab. We could certainly use our really smart team to go and build these new features to improve the contribution experience, but we could get there a lot faster, modernize the tools even more, and do it. And actually, they paid us for this partnership And so it's a great example of how we can partner to create scale. We did the same with Open Collective. We were supporting camps to being the fiscal agent, which means we're a people's bank account. But we really, at the end of the day, we're limited by our own kind of like financial structure, and we could not support camps outside the U.S. and the U.K. There might have been some other countries, but really that's not adequate for a global community. So we partner with Open Collective, which provides support for camps much more globally, not fully globally, but much more globally. And then, of course, in terms of DrupalCon and being able to scale that around the world, starting with Europe, we're partnering with Quoni, who's in the back of the room. And they were mentioned in the Dries notes, so if you want to turn around, you can see them waving at you. And so this is another example how we can partner to scale impact. And we're really excited that they are really willing to take on the financial risk of standing up a DrupalCon, and that they want to work with the community to make sure it's grounded in our culture and our needs. And it's just a really exciting partnership that we're kicking off this week. And we'll see what, all the great things that come from this next year in Amsterdam. So those are the kinds of things that we do at the association.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
I may pass the talking stick maybe to Tim. Again, from that current, what DA is perspective, like how would you describe the DA?
Sure, yeah. So I think in addition to these kind of larger programmatic goals that we have and these things that we operate, like bringing DrupalCon to North America and to Europe and uniting the community in those ways and supporting tools on Drupal.org, we're also engaged on kind of a day-to-day level with being the people who connect different portions of the community to each other, whether those are the volunteers who are participating in organizing DrupalCons or contributors who are trying to find how to join an initiative and things like that. So we're often, there's a lot of really engaged, really committed community members and community volunteers, but I think there's very few people, even among that highly engaged group, who are more tightly connected to what's going on throughout the entire Drupal project than the staff on a day-to-day basis. So the other role we play is to be some of the few people who have the opportunity to see the big picture of Drupal and identify what's coming down the pipe, what we need to be keeping our eye on, and what's coming next.
And now Suzanne, who has a fresh perspective to some degree. I mean, you've been involved in the community for a really long time, and running your own business in Canada and being involved in community initiatives, but you're only about to step on to the DA. So I'd love your perspective on what you think the DA is and where it fits.
Yeah, so I think from the community perspective, if you think about, I think if most people think about what the DA is, the things that are most visible are definitely Drupal.org and then the DrupalCons. So anyone who's been to a DrupalCon, this is what you probably think of like as what the Drupal Association organizes. And just joining the board, what I'm excited about is seeing how there's also a lot of strategic thinking going on behind the scenes about, like I think we all saw this morning in the Dries note that mountain metaphor of like pushing Drupal up the mountain and basically pushing it to the next level. And it's great to see that on the board there's work being done to push it up there. I mean, the association has a certain role in that, but also it has a role in facilitating community efforts to get it there. So for example, the Promote Drupal, the work with Promote Drupal to provide tools for people to market Drupal all around the world and to kind of facilitate those efforts and help agencies help themselves in promoting Drupal. So it's exciting to see that's happening, and I think it seems like this is something that hopefully the Drupal Association will be able to focus on more going forward.
Thanks, Suzanne. And Piyush, from your perspective, how would you describe what the DA is and its part in the world?
Right. So I would speak more from an Indian Asian perspective. What people think. One of the things that they and I know is Drupal Association is that entity that brought DrupalCon to India a couple of years back and changed the whole community and the way they look forward. But besides that, they also, so there are these so many different software stacks and communities and businesses out there which one has an opportunity to work on if they want to. Drupal Association for the Drupal community is that entity that can help them choose why Drupal and possibly pull Drupal to that stage. And the trust which is already there, that yes, we are not going to be left behind, we'll be helped, we'll be supported, we'll be guided. If we do something great, someone is there to clap and someone there to push it there. That's what Drupal Association, in my perspective, is. So we're not a very highly successful big community with lots of events and all those things, although we do a couple of things really well. And we look up to other communities and Drupal Association per se to support us and be at par with all the other communities out there. So that's one of the big things that we are looking at in Drupal Association.
Thanks, Piyush. So that's sort of what it is. I mean, I want to see if we can take one question from the audience about the current state, what the DA is. There's an opportunity. It's like anything you've kind of puzzled about. Does anyone sort of have a question on whether? Brian.
So I would imagine one of the most difficult tasks at the DA would be to prioritize. I mean, that's the question of what's coming next. What is the DA not do? Because there's not, it's limited resources, both financially and personnel, and the community in all of its different forms asking for all this help and all these different things. So I think it would be helpful for people to understand what is the decision process. I mean, it's not somebody just sitting around and say, oh, we don't have time for that. I mean, how are those things getting decided? Because you can't do everything. So how do you decide what to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question and something that's really important to the association. I think the first value that Dries espoused in the Dries note, prioritizing impact, is the same value that governs the Drupal Association from that point of view. But of course, how do we determine among the, the Drupal.org customizations queue has a backlog of 3,500 issues or something like that, right? So how do we decide which things have that highest impact? How do we make the choice to prioritize? And you've got to be careful about that, because you can't say it's the loudest voices who are shouting. Sometimes you have to say, there are people in our community who are underrepresented and have needs that we have to prioritize as well. And we have to make a choice to say that is important enough to the future of our community that some of that comes first. So there's a balance between this collaboration with Dries to understand the priorities of the community, collaboration with initiative leads, and we're also in this unique position where we have to understand that only 7% of the people who come to Drupal.org have accounts. So we also have to think about the needs of that 93% of the rest of the community. So there's not this like single algorithm that we can dump everything into a black box and turn the crank and come out with the highest priority item.
Maybe we should develop one. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. Well, the answer is always a new technical solution, right? We just need to come up with yes, yeah. But what the answer tends to be is having people like the Drupal Association staff, like Megan, like all the people here who've been involved in the community as voices that we can listen to. We can't listen to the entire 100,000 voices in the room, but we can have people say, I represent a community who has this need, and we can have someone else say, I have this need, and we can start seeing patterns and parallels and say, okay, that's clearly where we need to be. That's how the Promote Drupal initiative came about. Really, all of the work in the last several years has been based on that kind of prioritization, about saying we're hearing these things, and this is the one that's going to be the biggest driver to push us up the mountain. Thanks,
Tim. All right, I want to shift pace a little bit now, and this is going to be a bit rapid fire. What the Drupal Association isn't. This has been fun for me as I've been involved in the community election. I was originally elected to the board, like Suzanne was, and then kind of hung around like a bad smell for a bit afterwards. But the elections are really close to my heart. But one of the things that I always kind of found puzzling and amusing was that some of the candidate statements, like people would want to come to the board of the Drupal Association to fix views. And the DA doesn't do that. And at that point in time, when I first heard that, views wasn't even in core, so it was like even further removed from what the DA could have impact from. So one of the misconceptions is the Drupal Association somehow shepherds the project itself. It doesn't. So that's one of my ones. So what I want to do is ask each of you, one of the things you've heard about what the DA does, that it just doesn't, and sorry, we can't help with that. Much as we would love to boil the ocean, I think, as Megan sort of said, we want to do all the things, but we can't do all the things. So what are some of the misconceptions that you've heard about what the DA does? And maybe I'll start. Who wants to? Well, you've still got the mic, Tim, so maybe you start and then pass it back.
All right, on the spot. I was gonna go with the DA isn't. We don't lead Drupal, right? The community does that, and Dries is the project lead, and we just convene those people. So, what's another misconception? I'm going to go for funny rather than especially insightful, which is just that when we had our office back in Portland, Oregon, we're now 100% remote, but there was a time when we had an office, and it was a historical building that used to be the police headquarters. So we would have people come in and break through the doors and ask for the police, and we would have to say, "I'm sorry, the Drupal Association is not the police. They're down the block."
Yeah, cool. Piyush, have you got it? Have you heard some?
Yeah, well, Drupal Association is not the feds of this community, right? It's not. It's not a federal entity that
not a
can do
federal entity.
anything. Rule and power. A lot of people think that something is going wrong. Drupal Association should go and fix it. No, I mean, Drupal Association is like just what, 30 people, 20 people? 17 people, right? It's the community that needs to do that. So that's one thing, And the second is Drupal Association is not there to make the government mandate Drupal in procurement programs. I think it's the local businesses that they have to do that. So yeah, I mean, not many myths I've come across other than those two.
Nice. Thanks, Piyush. Suzanne, what the Drupal Association isn't?
I guess I'm new to this, so I haven't heard all the myths yet. But I know one misconception that I guess I heard in the last couple years with the community working group that Donna mentioned, people thinking that there's like other initiatives in the community that are also part of the Drupal Association. So some people just think that any kind of organized effort around Drupal is grouped into what the Drupal Association is responsible for.
Took mine. All right, I'll come up with another one. Let's see. Yeah, I won't get too much into governance. I know it too well, and it's a boring topic for most people. But yeah, I mean, for the Drupal Association governance and our bylaws, it's only for our board and our 17 people. Like, it doesn't have any influence on the millions of people contributing and using Drupal. So we have a lot of influence in the project, but not authority over the project. So I think that's kind of what you were talking about, which is good and fine, and it allows us to play a role of facilitator of doing these kinds of partnerships on behalf of the project, and also a convener when the community is having the need to come together, but they just need someone to pull them together to have some good discussions. So we help with that. And then I think another misconception is our role with Drupal code. When I first got here in 2010, it said on the website like what we do and what we don't do, and at the time it said we do not touch Drupal code. And that is not the case anymore. We are very collaborative with the project, and the reason we have a release every 6 months is because the engineering team provided semantic versioning, as an example, and there's several others, but there's much more collaboration now, I think, between the Drupal Association and the project, and we're continuing to find more ways to collaborate and add value.
Thanks, Megan. Tim?
I've thought of another common misconception, and this is a human one, and something that I think affects us, especially when we're at a place like Drupal Europe or DrupalCon, where we're coming together as people, which is there's often a misconception that the DA is just the nameless, faceless organization shouting from the mountaintop. And those 17 people are all people who deeply care about the community, are members of the community, who cry when the community is hurting, and I mean that literally, like, who really deeply care about doing the right thing. And sometimes we are tempted to fall into a trap from both sides of thinking of the DA and the community as separate and apart from each other. and that's dangerous and not correct, and something that we really need to keep an eye on.
Thanks, Tim. That was the point that I wanted to kind of sum up, so thank you. And I think the misconceptions are really interesting. I think the DA is really an important part of Drupal. But it's also become sort of like this wall is a bit of a metaphor, that it also has become the thing that the community projects a whole lot of stuff onto that isn't necessarily what the DA does or is able to do. And that's been historical, and I think also the thing that Megan picked up is that shift that when she started and I started, there was this very strong statement on the website underneath the mission statement that the Drupal Association does not touch the code and has nothing to do with the code. But this increasingly collaborative relationship between especially the engineering team, the security team, which is a Drupal a project side entity, and the core, and is increasingly growing as well. So that's something where there's a shift in progress, and it's been really successful. So that's, I think, merging us into the what could be. And I think coming back to Tim's point, there's a lot of us and them in the misconceptions about the DA and the project and the community. The DA is not them. The DA is us. And that's one of the strongest misconceptions I'd like to bust, that every single member on staff is part of our community. They're not some other. They bleed when we bleed. Believe me, I've seen it. So I think that's one of the things I'd really like to see change in the could be, and I think that's probably a good moment for us to... Any other last misconceptions you want to get out there? I think we kind of covered off the big ones. Okay, cool. Oh, one more.
Yeah. One more, which is, I think there's a conception that the DA is supposed to do all the work for, like, on a global basis, and I think we thought that too, and that we would do a lot of our work and try to take some agency away from the community, saying like, oh no, this is ours to do, because we thought that was our charter. And a couple years ago, like when I stepped in as executive director, I realized I think we were hugging our mission to death. Because we were seeing that us and them being created when we were like, this is ours and that's yours, or when you take away people's volunteer roles that they love and they're passionate about, then they have less engagement. They don't really know where their place is. They're not quite as interested in what's left to do. And so that's not good, because this whole project thrives on engagement. So one of the things that was important to me was starting a process of giving agency back to communities, which is why, like, for the relationship with DrupalCon and Kwoni, I wanted to have a European advisory committee, which Barrett will be on, and Batty and Leon Tong, and that way it's the Europeans having agency and say over what the programming should be, because they're closest to the needs of the community here. And so those are some changes that we want to make, create what I call more surface area for engagement and collaboration. Yeah. And then next with India.
That's a good segue, I think, to Piyush.
Yeah.
To maybe talk a little bit about what's happening with Drupal India.
So at this point of time, we're trying to restructure, reorganize ourselves. We have different communities in India. Some of them are doing really good. Some of them are trying to figure out who they are and what should they do and who's going to help them. So we're trying to bring together leaders of the community, set up a legal entity. We're still trying to figure out a name at this point of time. There's a Drupal company in India which using Drupal word. You're probably aware of that. And we need to obtain an NOC from them before we can actually apply for a legal entity. So, those initial operational activities are happening. Once that happens, then we'll go ahead and set up the first few initiatives or programs, MVP kind of a model. And then the next step would be a Drupal India, DrupalCon, big event that, we need to start with. So that's one. And the second is we are looking forward to this thing called Drupal Campus Ambassador Program that is already running in India, in Pune and Mumbai. And we're trying to, we're hoping to give more power, more bandwidth in terms of volunteers and, replicate this across multiple other cities in India, because there's a lot of potential out there. So many engineering colleges. There are more than 150 engineering colleges in my city, by the way, private engineering colleges, and there's so much of bright talent out there. If we can start educating them about Drupal, giving them an option, showing them the community and the possibilities, I think we can make a big change. So these are some few small steps that we're trying to take. But we're really grateful to leaders like Shyamala Rajan, who's actually been on the board, and now she's bringing a plethora of insight and support. I mean, she's amazing. So thank you, board, again, for giving us a leader who came from us. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Piyush.
Thanks.
I think I'd like to riff on that a little bit too, in the sense of global. I think I've been a squeaky wheel on the board but what about us for the rest of the world? Being from Australia, the only member of the board who's from the southern hemisphere, that whole bottom half of the world. And I've felt very keenly that there's definitely a focus on North America and a focus on Europe, because I've been coming to DrupalCon for quite a while now. But there's been DrupalCon in India, and there was a DrupalCon in Australia, and there was a DrupalCon in Bogota. But there hasn't been a DrupalCon in Africa, and there hasn't been a DrupalCon in China, and there hasn't been a DrupalCon in Indonesia, and there hasn't been a DrupalCon in Brazil. And these are where actually the most people in the world live. So this global thing is sort of, I think, really interesting. But the DA, as 17 people, couldn't serve the needs of all. And so I'm really excited by this kind of embracing the other associations that already exist, like Drupal Stichting Nederland. And I'm not going to try and say the Danish one, but maybe Vibeke could say the Danish Drupal Association's actual name.
Well, I can't remember.
Fair enough. But there are these
Something about Denmark.
something about Denmark. Very good. Yes, something about Denmark. But these entities already exist. So India is in the process of forming one for all of India. And like, India is as diverse, if not more diverse, than the whole of Europe, and there's definitely more people there. But these kind of partnering with these associations around the world is something that I think is part of the could be for the association, just to wave my own flag. It's something part of the could be of how the DA could work in the future. So let's segue into the could be, and I'm wondering if one of you has a comment to make, or if I should go to the audience now for some questions about the could be. Yeah? So I think, oh great, you can take that one, and then I can use this one to run backwards and forwards with our panel. So over to you, audience. So you've heard what the Drupal Association is, and you've heard a little bit of what it's not, and what it's assumed to be. But we're moving into a new phase. We've definitely been talking about this shift to work more collaboratively with the project itself. There's also a shift on from focusing intensely on the developer journey to our adoption journey, and how the people who are using Drupal can be involved, and how we can engage them and give them what they need. So these are some of the things that are in progress. So what could the association be? What questions do you have about the future of the Drupal Association?
Hi, everyone. I've been thinking a lot, so I'm a lot involved with Drupal diversity and inclusion, which is not part of the DA, as they covered. And we've been talking kind of internally about confusion that happens between diversity and inclusion efforts that you do and ours. And I'm just curious if there's been talk amongst you all about official initiatives or anything coming from the Drupal Association about diversity and inclusion, or how you're thinking about that, just because I'm kind of personally curious.
So just to clarify the question, it's distinguishing between community inclusion and diversity initiatives and DA inclusion and diversity initiatives?
And if there's any planning going, like, we kind of have, I feel like I understand the current relationship. I feel like I do understand the current relationship, and I'm just curious on, their side, kind of what might be.
So I think your question is more about general process, not about specifics.
Yeah.
But Yeah, I mean, as you know, because you and I have talked about it, one of the specific initiatives we have is that we know that people involved in DD&I have been involved in the Open Demographics Initiative. And so that's one of the first things. We know that there's the DD&I Contrib team, that I lurk in that channel in Slack all the time, is working on an updated gender module for Drupal.org. And they're doing it based on the Open Demographic open source project for providing more demographics for inclusion. And so that's something that when that project gets off the ground, we definitely want to integrate. But that's like making sure that we're aware of and responsive to what the community's doing, which is not necessarily the same as our own internal initiatives. So when it comes to our own internal initiatives, there certainly have been some in the past and others that will continue. So for example, setting our metrics around the speaker diversity and underrepresented groups is something that's been really important and that Amanda pioneered within the association. And only a little while back, we started collecting some of that data for just regular account registrations. It's not the full thing that we hope for from ODI, but we're beginning to have enough data to actually draw conclusions and compare ourselves to other organizations. So I'd like to get to a point where we can look at the demographic reports that come out of Google and Mozilla and Facebook and whatever, and a number of these organizations haven't quite standardized on how they measure their success, but they're getting closer, and be able to benchmark ourselves against other projects. So from the DA's perspective, I think most of our initial initiatives are around that data gathering, but they're also around figuring out places where through the neglect of 10 years of craft, we may have left something behind that could be harmful, that needs to be removed. So those are the things that are kind of on my mind going into a week and a half from now when I'm in charge of some of these things. But yeah, that's a few of the things we're working on.
Thanks, Tim. Does that? Yeah, great. Thanks. Great question. Bert, I'll run round.
Thank you. I have a very long and difficult relationship with the DA, so that for starters. And I can say a zillion things, but I said you said it all. I think we should. I was one of the guys who said them and they when I said you, us.
It's your fault, Bert. Explains so much.
Exactly my point. Let's not do that. Indeed, I think that Megan, you did a wonderful job, as I said before, on making sure there's no them and they. It's us and a lot of us. So that for starters. One of the things that I would like to know for the future, not for looking backwards, there will be a lot of, and I think in Northern America there's a lot of stuff going on the internet and freedom right now. And unfortunately in Europe, despite the GDPR, will hit a lot of problems when it comes to privacy, big corporations taking over the net as well. What I would love to see, what a DA would do, is team up with the EFF or some other meta organization or found it and hook up and make sure that we have political power as well as code power. Because we're good at coding, we're good at making stuff, we're changing the world, but not in Washington or in Brussels. And sorry, in India, and sorry, I don't know where your power is, but and in a zillion other places. And I would love that the DA takes the lead here, hook up with the WordPress and other communities and make sure with the EFF that we can make a political stand as well.
I agree.
Thanks, Bert. I gave the mic to Suzanne because she's in the middle. But I thought, like, your perspective, you're in North America, but not the US, and that this is a global issue, right? About the internet. How it's kind of important, right, to Drupal, the internet, and the freedom stuff. And there's a slightly different nuance in what's going on in the US to what's going on in Europe. I have some field opinions about it from Australia. So I thought maybe, Suzanne, you could sort of segue this into that kind of how are you dealing with it, for instance, in Canada, some of the issues of being multilingual and some of the flow-on effects into GDPR, because it's kind of different in Canada even in the US, right? So I thought I'd give the floor to you on this one.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges of being a global association is that it would be hard for the Drupal Association to address things like this that are kind of regional in nature. But one of the things that the association can do is bring together, for example, Drupal agencies and other members of the community that are really passionate about these issues, and provide them a space to work together and become some kind of a voice. on those issues. So I think those would be an example. Certainly GDPR is something that is very important in Europe, and arguably the rest of the world could also take as an example. So I think that could be maybe, I'm not sure on the specifics, but that could be something that the Drupal Association does just to help bring people together on those issues.
Sure. I'll kind of pull the lens back a little bit more, which is, so Drupal is big and has lots of impact. And one of the things that we are challenged as a project is that we stay within Drupal, our little Drupalverse. We don't break out of that bubble, right? And we need to start building bridges with other projects, with other technologies, in a way that we can have a bigger story in the marketplace or within open source, but especially when it comes to advocacy, because there's power in numbers. That's one of the things, like as we look to the future, I hope that's what we start moving towards and start building those bridges. One, because I think we, if not us, then who, to help champion some of these really important causes and bringing the right parties together to do it. And then the other part is there's a bigger discussion about digital transformation going on and how people want to acquire software. And we need to be partnering with the other technologies and being part of that story. From a technology perspective and a solutions perspective, we need to be building those bridges as well for that reason. And then within open source, I mean, we are pioneering open source. And we need to start playing more of a leadership role within the greater open source community. We have a lot to teach people.
Yeah, thank you, yeah. So we were at 11:15 was when we were meant to finish, and it's now 11:15. We started 5 minutes late, so I just want to get a sense of, do you want to just continue and wrap up the conversation, or that was a pretty good note to close on, so that's pretty powerful. So sense of room, if you've got to leave, I'm going to give you a chance now to stand up and depart, but I think if you want to stay for another few minutes and just wrap up, then we'll do that. Does that sound okay? Yeah? Okay. So feel free to sneak out now.
Okay. My name is Vibeke, and I come from, as I just checked, Drupal Denmark. Oh, that's easy. So it's easy, so no complication there. I have been coming here since Barcelona, and I would have loved that this session was part of DrupalCon every time, because it has taken me about 2 years, or 2 years, to DrupalCons to get the beginning of what DA does. So I think you should implement this one in every DrupalCon at the first day for newbies, or what you call us. Thank you.
Marching orders, clearly. Thanks, Vibeke. I totally agree. Any comments on that? Thumbs up, okay. I think we've probably got time for one more question, and then we wrap up. Path, you little finger there.
Thank you, guys. Moving forward, how does the Drupal Association plan on being, involved with the local chapters that come up?
That's a really good question, and I think one of the things that we're doing, we talked about this a lot in the board retreat this past weekend, is, for example, with Shyamala working with Drupal India, establishing some existing local associations that have been highly successful, like the Netherlands community, the German community, new associations that are coming online, like the India community, and then finding a way to continue to talk to them on a regular basis, like some formal program of being in constant contact with each other, and making sure that they're talking amongst themselves as well. I don't know that we have exactly nailed that down. I think this process with Drupal India is actually, this is kind of our prototype for how we want to establish that. So we're in the process of figuring out how to make that happen.
Thanks, Tim. And Piyush, final word on that?
Maybe, based on what you just said, an idea that I like to share is, like you have different levels of sponsors or supporters, members in association. There may be associations levels as well, right? So these are like new associations. They need different kind of messaging, different level of support, collaterals and stuff. there was a conversation at the round table that we create a starter kit for these associations. So those could be the target audience for that. Second level associations like Drupal India or similar others who know what to do, who started on that journey. And the third could be more evolved and established association, which can actually be at a different level. I think that could be one idea.
I think that's great.
as well.
And I think also Drupal France is a really good example because Drupal.org is all in English and the French community are French speaking. And Drupal France has worked very hard to make sure that there are Drupal materials available in French. And I think that's going to be a really important thing for these regional, local associations around the world to really take their own language and culture in a way that D.O can probably never really do. On that note, please, can you thank my panel? And yourselves. So ramp up that applause. So, look, thank you all very much for coming. I think we could continue on for a long time, but it's probably time to have a break. I really appreciate that you're coming, and I'm really grateful to all of you for your generosity and your time. So thank you all. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Go forth and caffeinate.